The dusty trail stretched endlessly before Kyle Morrison, and for the first time in his 24 years of life, he had to admit he was hopelessly, completely, and utterly lost. The Montana Territory sun beat down mercilessly on his shoulders as he squinted at the horizon, searching for anything that resembled the landmarks the men back in Oroville had described. He had left the mining town 3 days ago with clear directions to a ranch 50 miles south, where he had secured work as a ranch hand. But somewhere between the Third Creek crossing and what should have been a distinctive rock formation, everything had gone sideways. His horse, a temperamental mare named Bess, had thrown a shoe yesterday, forcing him to walk and leading him further off course as he searched for a blacksmith or settlement. The wilderness around him was breathtaking in its vastness. Rolling hills covered with ponderosa pines giving way to rocky outcroppings and meadows filled with wildflowers. It was June of 1878, and the territory was still wild enough that a man could disappear without a trace if he made the wrong turn. Kyle had always prided himself on his sense of direction, honed during his years working cattle drives from Texas up through Wyoming. But these Montana mountains played tricks on a man's sense of place. As the afternoon shadows began to lengthen, Kyle noticed his canteen was nearly empty. He had passed the last clear stream hours ago, and his throat felt like sandpaper. Bess whinnied softly, her own thirst evident. He patted her neck reassuringly, though he felt anything but assured himself. That was when he heard it, the clear, unmistakable sound of water rushing over rocks somewhere to his left. Relief flooded through him, and he led Bess toward the sound, pushing through a thick stand of lodgepole pines. The creek, when they found it, was narrow but swift running, the water crystal clear as it tumbled over smooth stones. Kyle dropped to his knees and drank deeply, the cold water like a blessing. Bess dipped her muzzle into the stream beside him, drinking her fill. As Kyle sat back on his heels, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand, he noticed something that made his heart sink. Across the creek, the terrain changed dramatically, becoming steeper and more treacherous. Behind him, the way he had come was equally forbidding now that he studied it more carefully. He had somehow wandered into a section of wilderness that seemed designed to trap the unwary. The snap of a twig made him spin around, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle strapped to his saddle. What he saw made him freeze completely. A young woman stood at the edge of the trees, a leather satchel slung over one shoulder and a hunting knife at her belt. She wore practical trousers tucked into worn boots, a simple cotton shirt, and her dark hair was pulled back in a long braid that fell past her shoulders. But it was her eyes that caught him, sharp and assessing, the color of pine needles in sunlight. She studied him with the wariness of someone who had grown up knowing the wilderness could be as dangerous as it was beautiful. "You are a long way from anywhere," she said, her voice clear and steady. There was no fear in her tone, only a frank observation. Kyle slowly moved his hand away from his rifle, holding both palms up to show he meant no harm. "Yes, madam, I am aware of that unfortunate fact. I am supposed to be heading to the Double R Ranch, but I appear to have missed my turn somewhere around 3 wrong decisions ago." The hint of a smile touched her lips, though she remained at a careful distance. "The Double R is 40 miles southeast of here. You have wandered into the high country between the Yellowstone and Boulder rivers. This is rough territory for someone who does not know the trails." "I am gathering that," Kyle said ruefully. He stood slowly, not wanting to make any sudden movements that might spook her. Now that he was on his feet, he could see she was younger than he had first thought, probably around 20 or 21, with sun-bronzed skin that spoke of countless hours spent outdoors. My name is Kyle Morrison. I am not a threat, just a lost cowboy who would be mighty grateful for some directions." She studied him for a long moment, her gaze taking in his dusty clothes, his exhausted horse, and the honest desperation in his eyes. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her, because she took a few steps closer, though still maintaining a respectful distance. "My name is Nora Fletcher," she said. "My father is a trapper. We have a cabin about 5 miles north of here. The sun will be down in a few hours, and these mountains are not safe to travel at night if you do not know the paths. There are drop-offs that could kill you and your horse before you even knew they were there." Kyle felt a surge of gratitude so strong it nearly buckled his knees. "Miss Fletcher, I would be more obliged than I can say if you would help me find my way. I do not want to impose, but I confess I am in a difficult situation." Nora nodded decisively. "Follow me. Stay close and watch where your horse steps. Some of these trails have loose shale that can give way without warning." She set off at a brisk pace, moving through the forest with a confidence that spoke of intimate familiarity. Kyle followed, leading Bess carefully, his eyes alternating between watching the trail and watching Nora herself. She moved like someone who had been born to these mountains, reading the landscape the way other people read books. Every so often she would pause, examining some sign that Kyle could not see, a broken twig, a disturbed patch of pine needles, and then she would adjust their course slightly. "How long have you lived out here?" Kyle asked as they climbed a steep section of trail. "All my life," Nora replied without looking back. "My father came to this territory 15 years ago when I was 6. My mother passed during the journey west, and it has been just my father and me ever since. He taught me everything about surviving in these mountains, every trail, every water source, every shelter. I know this land better than most people know their own homes." There was no boast in her words, just simple fact. Kyle found himself fascinated by this self-sufficient young woman who seemed so completely at ease in surroundings that had left him hopelessly confused. "You trap with your father?" he asked. "Sometimes. Mostly I hunt and gather. I know where the best medicinal plants grow, where the game trails run, which berries are safe to eat, and when they ripen. My father says I have a gift for reading the land." Now she did glance back at him, and there was a spark of something like pride in her eyes. "He says I know these mountains better than he does now." They walked in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the crunch of their footsteps and the occasional bird call. Kyle found himself stealing glances at Nora, admiring the sure way she moved, the intelligence in her eyes, the capable strength in her frame. He had known plenty of women in his life, town girls and ranch daughters, but none quite like this. As they crested a ridge, Nora stopped and pointed down into a small valley. "There, that is home." The cabin nestled in a clearing beside a larger creek, smoke rising lazily from its stone chimney. It was well built, constructed from local timber with a shake roof and what looked like a small barn or storage shed nearby. A vegetable garden had been planted to one side, and Kyle could see several animal pelts stretched on frames in the yard. "It looks like a good place," Kyle said honestly. "It suits us." Nora started down the slope, her movements sure despite the steep grade. "My father should be back soon. He went to check his trap lines this morning." As they approached the cabin, Kyle could see that the place was well maintained, everything neat and purposeful. A stack of firewood sat under a covered lean-to. Tools hung in organized rows on the side of the shed, and the garden showed signs of careful tending. Nora led Bess to a small corral, where a mule and 2 horses already stood. She examined the mare's feet with practiced hands, finding the missing shoe immediately. I can fix this tomorrow morning. We have shoes and the tools. For tonight, she will be fine here with water and feed." "I cannot thank you enough," Kyle said, and he meant it. "I was in a bad way out there." She looked at him directly then, and he felt the full force of her attention. These mountains do not forgive ignorance or carelessness, but they are generous to those who learn their ways. You were smart to stop when you did, instead of pushing on until dark. A man emerged from the cabin, and Kyle immediately saw the family resemblance. Nora's father was tall and lean, weathered by years of outdoor living, with the same sharp, intelligent eyes as his daughter. His hair was gray at the temples, and he moved with the quiet confidence of someone completely at home in his environment. "Papa, this is Kyle Morrison," Nora said. "He got lost trying to find the Double R Ranch. I found him at Willow Creek and brought him here for the night." The man extended a calloused hand. "William Fletcher, any friend of my daughter's is welcome at our fire." His handshake was firm, his gaze assessing but not unfriendly. "Thank you, sir. I am grateful for your hospitality. I am supposed to start work at the Double R, but I took a wrong turn somewhere and ended up thoroughly turned around." William nodded knowingly. "Easy to do in this country if you do not know it. The Double R is a good outfit. Nora can guide you there tomorrow after she fixes your horse's shoe. Tonight you will eat with us and rest. You look like you have been walking most of the day." "Yes, sir, since yesterday afternoon when Bess threw her shoe." "Come inside, then. We will be having elk stew, and there is plenty." The cabin's interior was surprisingly spacious and comfortable. The main room served as kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace that provided both heat and cooking capability. Shelves lined one wall, filled with preserved foods, herbs, and various supplies. A ladder led to a loft area, and Kyle could see two doors that probably led to separate sleeping quarters. The place had a lived-in warmth that came from being a genuine home, not just a shelter. Nora moved to the fireplace, where a large pot hung over the coals. The rich smell of cooking meat and vegetables filled the air, making Kyle's stomach growl audibly. He could not remember the last time he had eaten a proper meal. "Sit," William said, gesturing to a rough-hewn table with benches. "Tell me about yourself, Kyle Morrison." "What brings a young cowboy to Montana territory?" Kyle sat gratefully, his legs aching from the long day's walk. "I have been working cattle drives for the past 6 years, ever since I was 18. Started in Texas, where I grew up, worked my way north. I have been wanting to settle somewhere, find steady work instead of just following the herds. I heard Montana had good ranching country and opportunities for a man willing to work hard." "It has that," William agreed, "though it is still wild country. The territory only became official 7 years ago, and there is a lot of unsettled land. Good for those of us who prefer solitude, but it can be harsh for the unprepared." Nora brought bowls of stew to the table, along with thick slices of bread. The food was simple but delicious, the meat tender and the broth rich with herbs. Kyle ate slowly, savoring every bite. As he ate, he found himself watching Nora, the way she moved efficiently around the small kitchen, the quiet grace in her actions. "You have been on your own since your mother passed?" Kyle asked William. The older man's expression softened with old grief. "Nora and I have made our way together. She has been more than a daughter. She has been a true partner in this life we have built. There is no better tracker or hunter in these mountains than Nora Fletcher." Nora ducked her head slightly at the praise, but Kyle could see the pride in her eyes. "Papa taught me everything I know." "I taught you the basics," William corrected gently. "You took that knowledge and made it your own. You see things in these mountains that I miss now. Your mother would have been proud of the woman you have become." The affection between father and daughter was evident, and Kyle felt a pang of something like envy. His own family had been scattered by circumstance and hardship. His parents had died when he was young, and he had been raised by an uncle who viewed him more as free labor than family. He had left Texas as soon as he was old enough, seeking to make his own way in the world. After dinner, William pulled out a worn map and spread it on the table. By lantern light, he and Nora showed Kyle exactly where he had gone wrong and traced the route he should take to reach the Double R Ranch. "If you leave at dawn, you can be there by late afternoon," Nora said, her finger tracing a path on the map. "But you will need to be careful here and here." She indicated 2 spots. "The trails fork, and the wrong choice will take you into box canyons. Stay to the high ground and you will be fine." "I could describe it," William said thoughtfully, "but descriptions and the actual terrain are different things." "The wisest course would be for Nora to guide you. She needs to go into Oroville in a few days anyway to trade pelts. She could take you to the Double R first, then continue on to town." Nora looked at her father, then at Kyle. "I do not mind. It will only take a day out of my way, and it is better than having you end up lost in the high passes." "I could not ask you to do that," Kyle protested, though the thought of spending another day in Nora's company was more appealing than he wanted to admit. "You are not asking." "I am offering," Nora said firmly. "Besides, Papa is right. These trails are tricky. I would rather know you arrived safely than wonder if you fell into a ravine somewhere." William stood and stretched. "It is settled then. You will both leave at first light. Kyle, you can sleep in the barn. It is clean and dry, and there are blankets. Nora, you should pack supplies for a 2-day journey." Kyle helped clear the table, insisting on washing the dishes despite Nora's protests. As he worked, William told stories about the territory, about the hard winters and beautiful summers, about the wildlife and the challenges of making a living from trapping in an era when fur prices were unpredictable. Kyle listened with genuine interest, filing away information about this land he hoped to make his home. Later, as he settled into a pile of clean hay in the barn with a wool blanket wrapped around him, Kyle found himself unable to sleep despite his exhaustion. His mind kept returning to Nora, to her confident stride and knowing eyes, to the way she seemed so perfectly fitted to this wild landscape. He had met many women in his travels, but none had captured his attention quite like this trapper's daughter who knew every trail and secret of these Montana mountains. Morning came early, announced by the crow of a rooster and the soft sounds of the Fletcher household stirring to life. Kyle rose, brushed hay from his clothes, and emerged from the barn to find Nora already at work on Bess's hoof. She had a small forge going and was shaping a horseshoe with confident hammer strikes. "You really know what you are doing," Kyle said, impressed. "Out here, you learn to do everything yourself," Nora replied, not pausing in her work. "The nearest blacksmith is in Oroville, 2 days' ride. We cannot afford to wait or make the journey every time something needs fixing." Kyle watched as she expertly fitted and nailed the shoe, her hands sure and steady. Bess stood calmly through the whole process, seeming to sense she was in capable hands. William emerged from the cabin with packs of supplies. Food for 2 days, rope, basic medical supplies, and a tarp in case of rain. "The weather has been good, but these mountains make their own rules." "Thank you, sir," Kyle said, taking one of the packs. "I appreciate your generosity more than I can say." "Thank Nora. She is the one taking time from her schedule to help you." But William's eyes were kind, and Kyle sensed the older man approved of him. They set out as the sun was just clearing the eastern peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Nora led the way on a sturdy paint horse with Kyle and Bess following. The morning air was crisp and clean, scented with pine and wildflowers. As they rode, Nora pointed out landmarks and shared her knowledge of the terrain. "See that bent pine on the ridge? That marks the turn toward the southern valleys. And those rocks there, they look like a bear's head if you see them from the right angle. Markers like that are how you learn to navigate." Kyle absorbed every word, committing the information to memory. But more than that, he found himself simply enjoying Nora's company. She spoke with a passion about the land that was infectious, and her observations were sharp and insightful. She showed him where eagles nested, where mountain lions left their marks on trees, where the best fishing holes could be found. Around midday, they stopped by a stream to water the horses and eat the lunch William had packed for them: cold venison and biscuits with wild berry preserves. They sat on smooth rocks by the water, their horses grazing nearby. "How did you learn all this?" Kyle asked, gesturing to the wilderness around them. "I mean, I know your father taught you, but this kind of knowledge seems like it takes a lifetime to accumulate." Nora was quiet for a moment, her eyes on the rushing water. "When my mother died, I was devastated. For weeks, I could barely function. My father was grieving too, but he had to keep us alive, had to keep moving forward. One day, he took me out into the forest and told me that the wilderness was not something to fear, it was something to understand. He said my mother would want me to be strong, to learn to stand on my own feet." She paused, her voice growing softer. "So every day, we would go out together. He taught me to read tracks, to understand animal behavior, to identify plants and their uses. At first, it was just a distraction from grief. But gradually, I fell in love with it. The mountains became my teacher, my refuge, my home. I learned that if you pay attention, if you respect the land, it will provide everything you need." Kyle listened with rapt attention. "That is remarkable. Most women I have known were raised to very different lives. Most women do not grow up with a trapper father in the Montana wilderness," Nora said with a slight smile. "I will not say it has been easy. There have been times when I wondered what it would be like to live in a town, to have neighbors and social gatherings and all the things other young women have. But I cannot imagine giving up this freedom, this connection to the land. Do you ever get lonely?" Kyle asked, then immediately worried he had overstepped, but Nora did not seem offended. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Especially in the long winters when we are snowed in for weeks at a time. Papa is good company, but he is my father. It is not the same as having friends my own age or—" She trailed off, looking slightly embarrassed. "Or what?" Kyle prompted gently. "Or someone who shares your life as a partner," Nora finished quietly. "I am 21 years old. Most women my age are married with children. But the few men I have met have either been intimidated by my skills or wanted me to give up this life and become someone I am not. So I have decided that loneliness is preferable to losing myself." Kyle felt a surge of admiration for her fierce independence. "I think any man who wanted you to give up who you are would be a fool. What you have here, what you know, it is extraordinary." Nora looked at him then, really looked at him, and Kyle felt something shift in the air between them. It was as if they were seeing each other clearly for the first time, not just as a lost cowboy and his rescuer, but as two people who might understand each other in ways that mattered. "Tell me about you," Nora said, breaking the moment but not the connection. "Why did you leave Texas? What are you seeking in Montana?" Kyle leaned back on his hands, considering his answer. "I grew up poor, raised by an uncle who did not want me. As soon as I could, I left and hired on with a cattle outfit. For years, I thought that was enough, the freedom of the open trail, moving from place to place. But lately, I have been feeling like I want more. I want to build something, to have a place I can call home, maybe start a family someday. The double R offered steady work and fair wages, so I took it. But you had never seen Montana before. No, I just knew it was frontier territory with opportunity. I figured a man could make his mark here if he worked hard enough. He smiled ruefully, though I did not expect to get lost on my first journey through the territory. Getting lost is not always a bad thing, Nora said thoughtfully. Sometimes it leads you to where you are supposed to be. Their eyes met and held, and Kyle felt his heart beat faster. There was something happening between them, something unexpected and powerful. He had known this woman for less than 24 hours, but he felt more connected to her than to people he had known for years. They rode on through the afternoon, the conversation flowing easily between them. Nora continued to share her knowledge of the land, and Kyle told her stories from his years on the cattle trails, about stampedes and river crossings, about characters he had met and places he had seen. They laughed together, fell into comfortable silences, and gradually the distance between them began to feel less like that between strangers and more like something deeper. As the sun began to lower toward the western peaks, Nora led them to a sheltered meadow with a clear spring. "We will camp here tonight. The double R is about 5 hours' ride from here. We could push on, but we would arrive after dark, and that is discourteous." They worked together to set up camp, their movements becoming synchronized as if they had done this many times before. Kyle gathered firewood while Nora unpacked the supplies and tended to the horses. Soon they had a small fire crackling, coffee brewing in a battered pot, and dinner cooking. The evening was mild and beautiful, the sky turning from blue to purple to deep indigo. Stars began to appear, more stars than Kyle had ever seen, undimmed by any town lights. They sat by the fire, tin cups of coffee warming their hands, and talked as the night deepened around them. "You ever think about leaving?" Kyle asked. "Going somewhere else, seeing other places?" Nora shook her head. "I have thought about it, but these mountains are in my blood now. I cannot imagine living where I could not see these peaks, where I could not walk trails I have known my whole life. It would be like cutting off a part of myself." "I understand that, or I am beginning to." Kyle stared into the fire. "I have been drifting for so long, I almost forgot what it feels like to be rooted somewhere. But being here, seeing how you live, it makes me want that connection to place." "The double R is good land," Nora said. "The owners are fair people from what I have heard in town. If you work hard, you could build something there. And could I see you again?" The words were out before Kyle could stop them, bold and honest in the firelight. Nora turned to look at him, her eyes reflecting the flames. "Do you want to see me again?" "Very much," Kyle said softly. "I know we have only just met, and maybe I am speaking out of turn, but I have never met anyone like you, Nora Fletcher. You are remarkable." A faint blush colored her cheeks, visible even in the firelight. "You are not speaking out of turn. I would like to see you again, too. I am not usually so comfortable with strangers, but you feel different. You listen when I talk about the mountains as if you really care about what I am saying. Most people just think I am strange. You are not strange. You are extraordinary." Kyle shifted closer, closing some of the distance between them. "Would you let me come visit you and your father when I have time off from the ranch?" "Yes," Nora said simply. "I would like that." They sat in silence for a while, but it was a warm, comfortable silence filled with new possibilities. Eventually, Nora stood and spread out bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire, maintaining propriety even as something deeper was kindling between them. "Good night, Kyle Morrison," she said softly. "Good night, Nora Fletcher." Kyle lay awake for a long time, staring up at the star-filled sky, his mind full of this extraordinary woman who knew every trail in these mountains. He had come to Montana seeking steady work and a place to call home, but he was beginning to think he might have found something far more valuable. Morning came with mist in the meadow and birdsong in the trees. They broke camp efficiently, both aware that this day would bring them to the Double R Ranch and the end of their journey together, at least for now. As they rode, the landscape gradually changed, becoming more pastoral. They passed through valleys where cattle grazed, and the trails became more defined, clearly used by ranch traffic. Nora's guidance remained sure, but Kyle could see a change in her as they approached more settled country. She seemed to draw into herself slightly, as if the presence of civilization made her less certain than the wilderness ever did. Around mid-afternoon, they crested a hill and saw the Double R Ranch spread out in the valley below. It was a substantial operation with a large main house, several barns and outbuildings, extensive corrals and cattle dotting the surrounding rangeland. Smoke rose from multiple chimneys, and Kyle could see men working in the distance. "There it is," Nora said. "Your new home." Something in her voice made Kyle turn to look at her. She wore an expression he could not quite read, perhaps sadness or uncertainty. "Nora," he said, bringing Bess alongside her horse, "this is not goodbye. I meant what I said about coming to visit. If you will have me, I want to call on you properly, to see where this thing between us might lead." She looked at him, her green eyes searching his face. "The Double R will keep you busy, especially as a new hand. It is a full day's ride to our cabin, and that is if you know the trails. You might find, once you are settled into your new life, that a trapper's daughter does not fit into it very well." Kyle reached out and gently took her hand, a bold gesture but one that felt right. "Let me worry about that. I do not know what is happening between us, Nora, but I know I do not want it to end here. You have shown me something in these 2 days that I did not even know I was looking for. Please, give me a chance to prove I mean what I say." Nora's fingers tightened around his. "All right. But you should know, Kyle Morrison, I am not like other women. I do not know how to play games or pretend to be something I am not. If you come to visit, you will get exactly who I am, nothing more and nothing less." "That is all I want," Kyle said earnestly. "No pretense, no games. Just you, exactly as you are." A smile, genuine and warm, spread across Nora's face. "Then you are welcome at our cabin any time. Papa will like you, I think. He has been after me for years to find someone, though I think he had given up hope that I would find a man who understood our way of life." They rode down into the valley together, their horses side by side. As they approached the ranch, several men came out of the barns to watch their arrival. An older man with a weathered face and authoritative bearing stepped down from the main house porch. "You must be Kyle Morrison," the man called out. "We were starting to wonder if you had changed your mind about the job." Kyle dismounted, leading Bess forward. "No, sir. I am sorry to arrive late. I took a wrong turn and got lost in the high country. This is Miss Nora Fletcher. She guided me here from her father's place in the mountains." The ranch owner looked at Nora with interest and respect. "William Fletcher's daughter. I have heard of you and your father, finest trappers in the territory, they say. I am Richard Reynolds, owner of the Double R. We are grateful for your help." Nora nodded politely, but Kyle could see she was uncomfortable with the attention. "I was happy to help, Mr. Reynolds. Kyle is lucky he did not wander into the high passes. Those can be deadly for someone who does not know them. Well, we are glad to have him here safe and sound." Reynolds turned to Kyle. "Get settled in the bunkhouse and we will put you to work tomorrow. Today you can rest and get oriented to the place." "Thank you, sir." Kyle hesitated, looking at Nora. "I will walk you out a ways." They led the horses beyond the immediate bustle of the ranch, back toward the trail Nora would take to Oroville. When they were alone, Kyle found himself reluctant to say goodbye. "When can I come visit?" he asked. Give yourself 2 weeks to settle in and learn your duties, Nora said practically. Then come on a Sunday if you can spare the time. I will show you the trails properly so you can find your way on future visits. 2 weeks, Kyle repeated. I will be there. Nora mounted her horse, looking down at him with an expression that was part shy, part hopeful. Be safe, Kyle Morrison. Learn the work well and do not get yourself kicked by any horses or gored by any bulls. I will do my best. Kyle smiled up at her. Thank you, Nora, for everything. For saving me, for showing me these mountains, for giving me something to look forward to. Thank you for listening, Nora said softly. For seeing me as I am and not wanting me to be different. That is a rare gift. She turned her horse and rode away, her braids swinging down her back, her posture straight and confident. Kyle watched until she disappeared over the ridge, then he turned back to the ranch and his new life, carrying the memory of green eyes and a heart-stopping smile. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of hard work and new routines. Kyle threw himself into his duties, determined to prove his worth to the Double R. The work was demanding, mending fences, breaking horses, branding cattle, moving herds from one pasture to another, but it was honest labor and he welcomed it. The other ranch hands were a mixed group, some friendly and some reserved, but they all respected hard work and Kyle quickly earned his place among them. Richard Reynolds was a fair boss, demanding but not cruel, and his foreman, a grizzled veteran named Tom Harper, seemed to take a liking to Kyle. In the evenings, Tom would share wisdom about ranching in Montana, about reading weather signs and managing livestock in harsh winters. But through all of it, Kyle's thoughts kept returning to Nora. He found himself counting the days until Sunday, until he could ride back into those mountains and see her again. He worried that maybe he had imagined the connection between them, that maybe in the reality of his new routine, she would seem less extraordinary than she had on the trail. When Sunday morning finally arrived, Kyle was up before dawn, grooming Bess and packing supplies for the journey. Tom Harper caught him in the barn. Heading somewhere? The foreman asked with a knowing smile. Going to visit someone, Kyle admitted. The Fletcher girl who brought you in. At Kyle's surprised look, Tom chuckled. Word travels in these parts. Also, you have been mooning around here like a lovesick calf for 2 weeks. Good choice from what I have heard. She is supposed to be something special, that one. Just mind you are back for work Tuesday morning. Yes, sir, Kyle promised. The ride to the Fletcher cabin should have felt long, but to Kyle it passed too quickly. He found himself nervous, wondering if Nora would be as glad to see him as he hoped. But as he followed the landmarks she had taught him and the trail opened into the familiar valley, he saw her standing outside the cabin, clearly watching for his arrival. She wore a simple dress today instead of her practical trail clothes, a concession to his visit that touched him. Her hair was down, falling in dark waves around her shoulders, and when she smiled at his approach, Kyle felt his heart lift with relief and joy. You came, she said as he dismounted. Did you doubt I would? A little, she admitted. I thought maybe once you settled into ranch life, the mountains and a trapper's daughter would seem less appealing. Kyle took her hand, not caring who might see. I have been counting the days, Nora. You have been on my mind constantly. A becoming flush colored her cheeks. Come inside. Papa has been looking forward to your visit. He wants to hear how you are settling in at the Double R. William Fletcher greeted Kyle warmly, and they spent a pleasant morning talking while Nora prepared a substantial lunch. Kyle told them about his work at the ranch, about the other hands and the scope of the operation. William shared more stories about the territory and offered advice about surviving Montana winters. After lunch, Nora suggested showing Kyle some of the nearby trails. They walked together through the forest, and Kyle felt himself relax in a way he had not since leaving the cabin 2 weeks ago. In Nora's presence among these mountains, something in him settled and felt right. "Tell me truly," Nora said as they paused by a stream. "What do the others at the ranch think about you courting a woman like me?" "Tom Harper thinks I am lucky," Kyle said honestly. "Most of the others do not know yet." "Why? Are you worried about what they think?" "A little," Nora admitted. "I know I am not like other women. I do not fit the mold of what a ranch hand's wife is supposed to be." Kyle turned to face her fully. "Nora, I am not courting a mold or an idea of what someone should be. I am courting you exactly as you are. If I wanted some conventional woman, I would have stayed in Texas. But I met you, and you changed everything." "We have known each other for such a short time," Nora said, but there was hope in her voice. "Time is not always what matters," Kyle replied. "I have known plenty of people for years and never felt a fraction of what I feel when I am with you. You understand the world in a way that speaks to something deep in me. When you talk about these mountains, about living in harmony with the land, it makes me want to learn everything you know. When I am with you, I feel like I am becoming who I am supposed to be." Nora reached up and gently touched his face, her calloused fingers tender against his cheek. "I feel it too, this connection between us. It scares me a little how strong it is." "It scares me too," Kyle admitted, "but I do not want to run from it. I want to see where it leads." They stood close together, the stream rushing past, the forest alive with birdsong around them. Kyle, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, leaned down and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, tentative and sweet, but it sent warmth flooding through his entire body. When they parted, Nora was smiling, her eyes bright. "I have never been kissed before," she whispered. "I hope it was all right," Kyle said, suddenly uncertain. "It was perfect." She took his hand and laced their fingers together. "Come on. There is a meadow up ahead I want to show you. The wildflowers should be at their peak." They spent the rest of the afternoon exploring together, talking and laughing, stealing occasional kisses when the mood struck them. Kyle felt as if he was walking through a dream, but one he never wanted to wake from. This fierce, independent woman was letting him into her world, sharing her secrets and her heart, and he treasured every moment. When evening came and Kyle knew he had to start the long ride back to the ranch, William pulled him aside on the porch while Nora prepared supplies for his journey. "My daughter is precious to me," the older man said quietly. "She is all I have in this world, and I would do anything to protect her. But I can see she cares for you, and I can see you care for her. I am giving you my blessing to court her properly, Kyle Morrison, but I am also giving you a warning. If you hurt her, if you try to change who she is, you will answer to me." "I understand, sir," Kyle said seriously. "I give you my word, I love who Nora is. I would never want to change her." William studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "I believe you. Come back when you can. You are welcome here." Nora walked Kyle out to his horse, her hand in his. "When will you come again?" she asked. "As often as I can manage. Every Sunday if they will spare me." Kyle mounted Bess but leaned down to take Nora's hand once more. "I am falling in love with you, Nora Fletcher. I want you to know that." Her breath caught and tears shimmered in her eyes. "I am falling in love with you too, Kyle Morrison. Ride safe. Come back to me." The ride back to the Double R seemed endless, but Kyle's heart was light. He had found something he had not even known he was searching for, a woman who was his equal and his complement, who challenged and inspired him in equal measure. The weeks that followed fell into a pattern. Kyle worked hard during the week, earning the respect of his fellow ranch hands and the approval of Richard Reynolds. Every Sunday, weather permitting, he made the long ride to the Fletcher cabin. Sometimes he would arrive to find Nora ready to show him new trails, teaching him the mountains as her father had taught her. Other times, They would simply sit by the creek and talk for hours, sharing their dreams and fears, learning each other's stories. William Fletcher seemed pleased by the developing relationship, often leaving them alone for long stretches, trusting them to behave with propriety. As summer deepened into its full glory, Kyle found himself thinking constantly about the future, about how he could build a life with this extraordinary woman. One Sunday in late July, as they sat on a sun-warmed rock overlooking a valley filled with wildflowers, Kyle broached the subject that had been weighing on his mind. "I have been saving my wages," he said. "Every penny I can spare. I want to buy some land, start building something of my own. The double R is good work, but I do not want to be just a ranch hand forever." Nora looked at him with interest. "Where are you thinking of settling?" "Here. In this area. I love these mountains, Nora. You have taught me to see them the way you do, and I cannot imagine living anywhere else now." He took her hand. "But I need to know if that is something you would want too, a future here with me." She was quiet for a moment, her eyes on the distant peaks. "When I was younger, I used to wonder if I would spend my whole life in these mountains, growing old alone. Papa will not live forever, and I feared being completely isolated. But I also could not imagine leaving, could not imagine giving up this life for a conventional existence in some town." She turned to look at him, her expression serious. "Then you appeared, lost and needing help, and everything changed. You do not want me to leave the mountains, you want to join me in them. You listen when I talk about the land, and you are learning to read it yourself. You are not intimidated by my skills, you admire them. That is something I never dared to hope for." "So is that a yes?" Kyle asked, hardly daring to breathe. "Yes," Nora said softly. "Yes, I want a future with you, Kyle Morrison. I want to show you every secret of these mountains. I want to watch the seasons change with you year after year. I want to build a life together." Kyle pulled her close and kissed her deeply, pouring all his love and hope into that kiss. When they finally parted, both were breathless and smiling. "I will talk to your father when we get back to the cabin," Kyle said. "Ask his permission to marry you properly." "He will say yes," Nora assured him. "He told me last week that you were the answer to prayers he did not know how to pray. He sees how happy I am, and that is all he has ever wanted for me." They made their way back to the cabin hand in hand, the future stretching bright before them. William Fletcher was cleaning fish by the creek, and he looked up with a knowing smile as they approached. "Papa," Nora said, her voice filled with joy, "Kyle has something he wants to ask you." William set down his knife and stood, wiping his hands on his trousers. "I think I can guess what it might be." Kyle straightened his shoulders, feeling nervous despite Nora's reassurance. "Mr. Fletcher, I love your daughter with all my heart. She is the finest person I have ever known, and I want to spend the rest of my life with her. I am asking for your permission to marry Nora, if she will have me." William looked between the two of them, his weathered face creasing into a broad smile. "Kyle Morrison, you have my blessing and my gratitude. I have watched you with my daughter these past months, and I have seen how you respect her, how you value her for who she is. You have my permission, and my word that I will help you both in any way I can." Nora threw her arms around her father, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, Papa. You deserve happiness, daughter. You both do." William embraced them both. "Now let us go inside and have a drink to celebrate. This calls for the good whiskey I have been saving." They spent the evening making plans and celebrating. Kyle would continue working at the Double R to build up his savings, but he would also start looking for land nearby. William knew the territory intimately and promised to help Kyle find the perfect spot, somewhere with good water and timber, close enough to the Fletcher cabin that they could remain a family even as Kyle and Nora built their own home. As the evening wore on and the celebration wound down, Kyle knew he needed to start the ride back to the ranch. Nora walked him out to where Bess was tied, the summer night warm and filled with stars. "I do not have a ring yet," Kyle said, suddenly aware of this shortcoming. "I will buy you one in Oroville as soon as I can." Nora shook her head. "I do not need a fancy ring, Kyle. What I need is you, your love, your partnership. Everything else is just decoration." "You deserve decoration," Kyle protested. "You deserve everything fine and beautiful." "I have the mountains and I have you," Nora said simply. "That is everything fine and beautiful that I need. But if you want to give me a ring, make it something simple. I am not a fancy woman and I never will be." Kyle kissed her forehead tenderly. "I will find something perfect for you, I promise. And I will talk to Richard Reynolds about my plans. He is a fair man. He might even know of land for sale." "Be safe riding back," Nora said, as she always did. "And come back to me as soon as you can." "Always," Kyle promised. The next day, after morning chores were complete, Kyle asked to speak with Richard Reynolds privately. They sat on the main house porch with cups of coffee, and Kyle laid out his situation honestly. "I have met someone, sir. William Fletcher's daughter, Nora. I want to marry her and start building a life here in Montana. I am hoping to buy some land and eventually start my own small spread, but that is years away. In the meantime, I would like to continue working for you if you will have me, while I build up capital and experience." Reynolds was quiet for a moment, considering. "I have heard about you and the Fletcher girl. Tom mentioned it. I have also noticed you are one of the best workers I have had in years. You are steady, skilled, and the men respect you." He paused. "I will tell you what. I have been thinking about expanding my operation, but I need men I can trust. If you are willing to commit to working here for at least 3 more years, I will sell you a section of land at a fair price, land that borders the Double R. It is good grazing land with a creek running through it. You could build a cabin there, start a small herd." Kyle's heart leaped. "Sir, that is more than generous." "It is good business," Reynolds corrected. "I get a skilled worker who is invested in the area and you get a start on your own place. Plus, having William Fletcher's daughter nearby means access to his knowledge of the territory. That is valuable in itself. The Fletchers are respected in these parts, and with good reason." "I accept," Kyle said immediately. 3 years is more than fair, and I am grateful for the opportunity." They shook hands, and Reynolds smiled. "Congratulations, son. You are building a good life here. Montana territory rewards hard work and integrity, and you have both." Kyle could hardly contain his excitement as he rode to the Fletcher cabin the following Sunday. When he told Nora and William about Reynolds' offer, they were both thrilled. "That is excellent land," William said, clearly familiar with the area. "Water year-round, good timber, and close to both the Double R and our cabin. You could not ask for better." "We could be married by fall," Nora said, her eyes shining. "Build a small cabin before winter, something we can expand later. Papa can help, and I know the Double R hands would lend a hand too." "If we are going to build before winter, we should start soon," Kyle said practically. "I will talk to Tom Harper about getting a few days off for construction. And Nora, I got you this." He pulled out a small wrapped package. Inside was a simple gold band with a small green stone. "It is not much, but the jeweler in Oroville said the stone is called a peridot. It reminded me of your eyes, and I thought it was perfect." Nora's hands trembled as she slipped the ring on her finger. It fit perfectly, and she looked at it with wonder. "It is beautiful, Kyle. Absolutely beautiful. I will treasure it always." The next months were a blur of activity. Kyle worked his regular duties at the Double R during the week, but every spare moment was dedicated to building the cabin on his new land. True to Nora's prediction, the other ranch hands volunteered their time to help. working on Sundays and evenings to raise the walls and build the roof. William Fletcher brought his considerable skills to bear, and Nora worked alongside them, as capable with hammer and saw as any of the men. By early September, the cabin was complete, a sturdy structure with 2 rooms and a loft, a stone fireplace and windows that looked out over the creek and the mountains beyond. It was simple but solid, built to withstand Montana winters and built with love. They set the wedding for the last Sunday in September, before the weather turned. Reverend Matthews came out from Oroville, along with a surprising number of townspeople who had heard about the wedding. The whole Double R crew attended, and several neighboring ranchers as well. It seemed the story of the lost cowboy and the trapper's daughter who guided him to safety and love had spread throughout the territory. Nora wore a simple dress of cream-colored cotton that her father had purchased in Oroville, and she carried wildflowers from the mountain meadows. Kyle wore his best clothes, freshly cleaned, his boots polished. They stood together before the Reverend in the yard of their new cabin, with mountains all around and friends gathered close. "I, Kyle Morrison, take you, Nora Fletcher, to be my wife," Kyle said, his voice steady and sure. "I promise to honor you, to respect who you are, to walk beside you through all the seasons of our life together. You have my love, my loyalty, and my heart from this day forward." Tears streamed down Nora's face as she replied, "I, Nora Fletcher, take you, Kyle Morrison, to be my husband. I promise to share my life with you, to teach you the ways of these mountains as you teach me the ways of your heart. You have my love, my partnership, and my devotion from this day until the mountains themselves crumble into dust." The Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, and Kyle kissed his bride to the cheers and applause of their assembled friends. William Fletcher embraced them both, his eyes wet with tears of joy. The celebration that followed was simple but heartfelt. Tables had been set up in the cabin yard, laden with food that everyone had contributed. There was fiddle music and dancing, stories and laughter. As the sun set and lanterns were lit, Kyle and Nora stood together looking out at their new home and their gathered community. "Happy?" Kyle asked, his arm around his wife's waist. "More than I ever dreamed possible," Nora replied. "I thought I would spend my life alone in these mountains, but you got lost and found your way to me and everything changed." "Best wrong turn I ever made," Kyle said with a grin. As their guests gradually departed, and night deepened over the Montana wilderness, Kyle and Nora entered their cabin together as husband and wife. The fire in the hearth cast warm light over the simple furnishings they had built and gathered, the beginning of a life they would build together. "Are you nervous?" Kyle asked gently as they stood together in their new home. "A little," Nora admitted. "This is all new to me, but I trust you, Kyle. I love you." "I love you too," Kyle said, taking her hands. "We will figure everything out together, one step at a time." That is how we have done everything so far. They moved together naturally, the awkwardness falling away as they discovered each other with tenderness and passion. Their wedding night was everything it should be, a physical expression of the deep, emotional, and spiritual bond they had forged. The first winter in their new cabin was hard but beautiful. Kyle continued working at the Double R, learning everything he could about managing land and livestock. Nora taught him the skills her father had taught her, how to read weather signs, how to preserve food for the long cold months, how to move through the forest in deep snow. They worked together to make their cabin a home, adding small touches and improvements as they went. William Fletcher visited often, and they visited him in return, the 3 of them remaining close despite Nora's marriage. Kyle came to love William like the father he had never really had, and the older man clearly treasured having Kyle as part of the family. In March, Nora shared news that filled Kyle with joy and terror in equal measure. She was pregnant, their first child due in the fall. They spent the spring preparing, building a cradle from local pine, gathering supplies, planning for the future. On a crisp October evening, with William Fletcher and the doctor from Oroville present, Nora gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Thomas William Morrison, after Tom Harper, who had been such a good friend to Kyle, and William Fletcher, who had welcomed Kyle into their family. Kyle held his son with trembling hands, looking at the tiny face with wonder. "He is perfect," he whispered. "He has your eyes," Nora said tiredly but happily from the bed, already trying to see everything at once. The first years of parenthood were exhausting but joyful. Little Thomas was a curious, active child, who seemed to have inherited both his mother's love of the mountains and his father's determination. As he grew, Nora began teaching him the same lessons her father had taught her, showing him animal tracks and edible plants, teaching him to move quietly through the forest. Kyle continued working for the Double R, but he also began building his own small herd on his land, carefully selecting breeding stock and learning the intricacies of ranch management. Richard Reynolds proved true to his word, offering advice and support as Kyle developed his operation. 2 years after Thomas was born, Nora delivered twin girls, Emily and Rose. The cabin suddenly felt much smaller, and Kyle began planning an addition. With help from William and the ranch hands, they expanded the cabin, adding another bedroom and a larger main room. The years flowed by, marked by the changing seasons and the growing children. Thomas at 8 was already an accomplished tracker, able to move through the mountains with confidence that astonished visitors. The twins at 6 were inseparable, creative and clever, always getting into mischief. Kyle's land prospered. His small herd grew steadily, and he gained a reputation for quality livestock. More importantly, he and Nora had created something deeper than a successful ranch. They had built a life rooted in love, respect, and partnership, a life that honored both Kyle's ranching ambitions and Nora's deep connection to the wilderness. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, their children playing in the yard, Kyle reflected on how far he had come. "You ever regret it?" he asked Nora. "Marrying a lost cowboy who stumbled into your life?" Nora laughed, the sound as clear and joyful as the first day he had met her. "Not for a single moment. You were the best thing that ever got lost in these mountains." "I think I was meant to get lost," Kyle said thoughtfully, "so I could find you, find this." He gestured to their home, their children, the life they had built together. "Maybe," Nora agreed. "Papa always said the mountains provide what you need if you are open to receiving it. You needed a home and a purpose. I needed a partner who understood me. The mountains brought us together." As darkness fell and they called the children inside for supper, Kyle felt a profound sense of gratitude. He had come to Montana territory seeking steady work and a fresh start. He had found so much more than that. He had found love, family, home, and purpose. He had found his future wife on a trail he was never supposed to be on, and that chance meeting had shaped every good thing in his life since. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and challenges. William Fletcher grew older but remained active, a beloved grandfather to the Morrison children. Kyle's ranch continued to thrive, and he became known throughout the territory as a fair dealer and skilled rancher. Nora remained the heart of their family, her knowledge of the land invaluable, and her love the foundation on which everything else was built. When Thomas turned 18, he announced his intention to become a territorial guide, using the skills his mother and grandfather had taught him to help others navigate the Montana wilderness safely. Kyle could not have been more proud, seeing his son embrace the heritage Nora had passed down. The twins, now 16, were planning to attend the new territorial school in Oroville, the first in the Morrison family to seek formal education beyond what their parents could provide. Nora worried about them leaving, but Kyle reminded her that they were giving their daughters choices she had never had. And that was a gift. One late summer evening, nearly 20 years after Kyle had first gotten lost in the mountains, he and Nora took a rare evening to themselves. The children were old enough to manage on their own for a night, and they rode together to the meadow where Kyle had first kissed her all those years ago. The wildflowers were at their peak, just as they had been that first time, painting the meadow in brilliant colors. They dismounted and walked hand in hand through the flowers, their steps slow and comfortable. "You remember the day you found me by Willow Creek?" Kyle asked. "Of course. You looked so lost and frustrated, but also too proud to admit how desperate your situation was." Nora smiled at the memory. "I almost rode past you. I was not sure I wanted to get involved with a stranger, but something made me stop, made me offer help. I am grateful you did. Every single day I am grateful." Kyle stopped and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Nora Morrison, you are the finest thing that ever happened to me. You have given me a life beyond anything I ever imagined possible. You have made me a better man, a better father, a better human being." "You did that yourself," Nora protested. "I just showed you some trails." "You showed me everything that matters," Kyle insisted. "You taught me that home is not just a place, it is a person. You taught me that strength comes in many forms. You showed me how to be part of something bigger than myself, how to live in harmony with the land instead of just taking from it." Tears sparkled in Nora's eyes. After all these years, his words still moved her deeply. "And you showed me that I did not have to choose between who I was and being loved. You never asked me to be less than myself. You celebrated who I was and built a life that honored both of our dreams. That is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." They stood together in the meadow as the sun set, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting and true. Around them, the Montana wilderness stretched in all directions, wild and beautiful and home. The evening star appeared in the deepening blue, and Nora pointed it out to Kyle as she always did. "Make a wish," she said, as she had said countless times over the years. "I do not need to," Kyle replied. "Every wish I ever had came true the day you found me by that creek." They rode back to their cabin in the gathering darkness, comfortable in the silence between them. The lights of home appeared through the trees, warm and welcoming. Smoke rose from the chimney, and they could hear the voices of their children inside, laughing over something. As they stabled their horses and walked toward the cabin, Kyle looked at Nora in the lamplight and felt his heart swell with love and contentment. She had been right all those years ago when she said that getting lost sometimes led you exactly where you were supposed to be. He had set out to find a ranch job and a new start. Instead, he had gotten lost in the Montana wilderness and found a woman who knew every trail, who had guided him not just to safety but to a life richer and more fulfilling than he had ever dreamed possible. He had found his home, his purpose, and the great love of his life, all because he took a wrong turn in the mountains. Life continued its rhythm over the following years. The Morrison Ranch became one of the most respected operations in the territory, known for quality livestock and fair dealing. But more than that, it became known as a place of hospitality, where travelers could find help and guidance, where lost souls might find direction, just as Kyle once had. Nora began teaching tracking and wilderness skills to others, sharing the knowledge William Fletcher had given her and that she had refined over a lifetime in the mountains. Young men and women came from across the territory to learn from her, and she took pride in passing on the wisdom of the wilderness to a new generation. William Fletcher lived to see all his grandchildren grown and even met his first great-grandchild before he passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78. He died in the cabin he had built so many years ago, surrounded by family, his life full and complete. At his funeral, dozens of people came to pay respects, testament to a life well lived and a legacy of knowledge and kindness. Thomas Morrison became one of the most sought-after guides in Montana, his reputation for safety and expertise spreading far beyond the territory. He married a schoolteacher from Oroville, a practical woman who adapted well to mountain life, and they had 4 children who all learned to love and respect the wilderness. The twins both attended the territorial school and then returned home to marry local men. Emily married a rancher from a neighboring spread, while Rose married a doctor who had come west seeking adventure and found both that and love. Both couples settled near the original Morrison ranch, creating a close-knit extended family. As Kyle and Nora entered their 50s, they found themselves with time again for each other. Their children were grown and settled, the ranch was well established, and they could take long rides into the mountains, just the two of them, rediscovering the trails where their love had first bloomed. "I never imagined this," Nora said one day as they sat on a hillside overlooking the valley where their cabin stood. "When I was a young girl, alone with Papa in the wilderness, I never imagined I would have all this. Children, grandchildren, a partner who understood me completely. It seemed like an impossible dream." "Nothing worthwhile is impossible," Kyle said, his arm around her shoulders. "It just takes the right combination of courage, work, and being open to unexpected possibilities. Like a cowboy who got lost and a woman who knew every trail." "We were both lost in our own ways," Nora reflected. "You were lost in the wilderness. I was lost in loneliness, in wondering if I would spend my whole life alone. We found each other and found ourselves in the process." Montana achieved statehood in 1889, and the Morrison family celebrated along with the rest of the territory turned state. The wild frontier was slowly becoming more settled, but the mountains remained as wild and beautiful as ever, a constant in a changing world. Kyle and Nora made sure that portions of their land would remain undeveloped, left wild for future generations to enjoy. They taught their children and grandchildren the importance of stewardship, of taking care of the land that had provided for them so generously. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren organized a celebration at the ranch. Nearly 100 people attended, including old friends from the Double R, neighbors from across the region, and people whose lives had been touched by the Morrisons in various ways over the years. Richard Reynolds, now retired but still sharp-minded, stood to give a speech. 30 years ago, a young cowboy arrived at my ranch, brought there by a remarkable young woman who had saved him from being lost in these mountains. I hired that cowboy, and it turned out to be one of the best decisions I ever made. But more than that, I got to watch as these two people built not just a successful ranch, but a real legacy. They built a family rooted in love and respect. They built a reputation for integrity and fairness. And they built a life that honors both the demands of civilization and the call of the wilderness. Kyle, Nora, you have shown us all what it means to build something lasting and true. Congratulations on 30 years, and here is to 30 more. The crowd erupted in applause, and Kyle pulled Nora close, kissing her to cheers and whistles from their children and grandchildren. Looking around at the gathered faces, at the life they had built together, Kyle felt a profound sense of completion. Later, As the celebration wound down and guests began departing, Kyle and Nora stood together on their porch, watching the sun set over the mountains they both loved so deeply. 30 years, Kyle mused. It has gone by so fast and so slow at the same time. Every day with you has been a gift, Nora. And every day with you has been an adventure, Nora replied. Even the quiet days, the ordinary days, have been special because we were together. Do you think we did right by our children? Kyle asked, a question that had been on his mind lately. Giving them this wild, unconventional upbringing. Look at them, Nora said, gesturing to where their children were gathering their own families to head home. Thomas is confident and skilled, respected across the state. The twins are happy, married to good men, raising families of their own. They are all healthy, capable, and kind. What more could we ask for? Nothing, Kyle admitted. You are right. They turned out better than we could have hoped. As darkness fell and the last guests departed, Kyle and Nora went inside their cabin, now much expanded and improved from the simple structure they had started with 30 years ago. But the bones of that first cabin were still there, a reminder of where they had begun. They sat together by the fireplace, Nora's head on Kyle's shoulder, comfortable in the silence that only long partnership brings. "Thank you," Kyle said softly. "For what?" "For finding me when I was lost. For showing me the way home. For building this life with me. For being exactly who you are and letting me love you. For everything." Nora lifted her head and kissed him gently. "Thank you for getting lost. For being willing to ask for help. For seeing me as I was and not wanting me to be different. For giving me a partnership instead of trying to own me. For this beautiful, impossible life we have built together." The years continued, as years do, bringing the inevitable changes that time brings to all lives. Kyle and Nora grew older together, their hair graying, their steps slowing, but their love never diminishing. If anything, it deepened with each passing year, each shared experience, each challenge overcome together. They celebrated their 40th anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The ranch had passed primarily into Thomas's management now, though Kyle still helped with major decisions, and Nora still taught wilderness skills to anyone willing to learn. On a perfect June morning, much like the June morning when Kyle had first gotten lost 42 years before, he and Nora took one last ride into the mountains together. They were both in their 60s now, but still capable, still strong enough for one more adventure. They rode to all their special places, the creek where they had first met, the meadow where they had first kissed, the hillside where Kyle had proposed. They talked and laughed, remembering stories from their long life together, marveling at how far they had come. "If I could go back," Kyle said as they rested beside Willow Creek, "and tell that lost, desperate cowboy what his life would become, he would never believe me. He could not imagine anything this good. If I could go back and tell that lonely girl that she would find a partner who loved her exactly as she was, she would think it was a fairy tale," Nora replied. "We have been blessed beyond measure, Kyle Morrison." "We have made our own blessings," Kyle countered. "Through hard work, dedication, and choosing each other every single day." "That is true too," Nora agreed. They rode home slowly, savoring the journey, the beauty of the mountains around them, the warmth of the sun, the simple joy of being together. When they reached their ranch, their son and daughters were waiting for them with worried expressions. "You were gone so long," Emily said. "We were starting to worry." "We were just saying goodbye," Nora said softly. The family looked confused, but Kyle and Nora just smiled at each other, understanding passing between them without words. They had had their last great adventure together, had visited all the places that mattered to them, had said all the things that needed saying. That night, they lay together in the bed they had shared for over 40 years, holding hands in the darkness. "I love you, Kyle Morrison," Nora whispered. "From the first moment I saw you by that creek until my last breath, you have been the greatest blessing of my life." "I love you, Nora Morrison," Kyle replied. "Getting lost in these mountains and finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me. Thank you for every moment, every day, every year. Thank you for being my wife, my partner, my home." They fell asleep like that, hands clasped, hearts full, their long and beautiful journey together complete. Kyle Morrison passed peacefully in his sleep that night, his hand still holding Nora's. He was 66 years old, and he died as he had lived for the past 4 decades, beside the woman he loved, in the home they had built together, surrounded by the mountains that had brought them together. Nora grieved deeply, but without regret. They had had 42 beautiful years together, and she treasured every memory. She lived for 7 more years, continuing to teach and guide, passing on her knowledge to grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She told them stories of their grandfather, of how he had gotten lost and found his future wife instead, of how love and respect had built something stronger than either of them could have created alone. When Nora's time came, she asked to be buried beside Kyle on the hillside overlooking their ranch, with a view of the mountains they had both loved so deeply. Her children and grandchildren honored her wish, and on a clear autumn day, they laid her to rest beside her beloved husband. The Morrison Ranch continued through the generations, always run by someone who had learned from Kyle and Nora, who understood the importance of respecting the land and honoring the legacy they had created. The cabin where it all began was preserved as a family treasure, a reminder of 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting and true. In the small cemetery on the hillside, 2 simple headstones stood side by side. On one was carved, "Kyle Morrison, 1854–1920. A cowboy who got lost and found his home." On the other, "Nora Fletcher Morrison, 1857–1927, the trapper's daughter who knew every trail and showed the way to love." And in the mountains around them, in the trails they had walked together and the wilderness they had cherished, their story lived on, told and retold to new generations. The story of how getting lost sometimes leads you exactly where you need to be, how love can bloom in the unlikeliest circumstances, and how 2 people who respect and honor each other can build something beautiful that lasts long after they are gone. Their great-great-grandchildren still walk those trails today, still tend the land Kyle and Nora loved, still honor the legacy of the lost cowboy and the trapper's daughter who found each other in the Montana wilderness and created a love story for the ages.